I've spoken in Lunenburg a few times over the past couple of years. Of course, the whole COVID thing put a brakes on a lot of stuff, but it's been a few years since I've spoken here at the library. It's a beautiful library. So, thank you all for coming out and joining me tonight. Even those who had to get their homework done first. I still haven't finished mine. Even what you had, you did it fast. That's the secret to life's success. There you go. Thank you for coming. So, I'm going to talk to you for just under the next hour about a subject that I know we have some baseball fans here. But I would say, this is not really just about baseball. This is about a fascinating slice of American history, of African American history. And African American history is, after all, American history. And this is a slice that is often misunderstood, as fascinating as it is, and as much as we think we understand it, we often think wrong in terms of some of the details around baseball's color barrier. And I'm going to prove it to you right off the bat, as it were. I'm going to prove it to you because one of the things that was behind my wanting to write, and this goes beyond this book project, is that as a journalist, as someone who I'm sure like many of you loves history, I've often been fascinated how, as time moves on, we often grasp less and less of the context of a historical event, no matter how as time goes on. So in other words, an event that happens right now for us, January 6th, off the top of my head, we know great detail because it's been well reported while we are contemporaries of the event. You take an event that's 100 years off, right behind us, all the context begins to be lost. And we may think we understand that event. Trust me, we don't, because we start to lose some of the vital context that informs that event. It's like, I always say, think of it like the ripples in a pool. You toss a rock, right? And the ripples right at the center are sharp and concise and concentric, and then they start to dissipate. That's what happens with history. I'm going to prove it to you right now. Instead of yapping about it, I'm going to prove it to you. So, let me start with this question. After Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, who became the second black Major League ball player? Larry Sherman is disqualified because we talked about this on his radio show yesterday, so he knows too much. Anybody want to take a guess? Who was the second black ball player? Larry Doby. Larry Doby's a great guess. Larry Doby, Satchel Paige, Larry Doby, both good guesses, both right in the ballpark, as it were, both wrong. No, because the thing is, it's a bit of a trick question. After Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, the second black Major League ball player was Jackie Robinson. Because Jackie Robinson, believe it or not, this sounds like blasphemy. It's not. Jackie Robinson didn't do the thing you think he did. Jackie Robinson did not integrate Major League Baseball. It takes nothing away from Jackie Robinson, but he did was heroic and courageous and one of the greatest achievements in American history. But he didn't integrate Major League Baseball. He reintegrated Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball had been integrated 60 plus years before Jackie Robinson by this man who nobody knows his name. Now, wouldn't you think, if Jackie Robinson has become, for very good reason and well-deserved, if Jackie Robinson is the only Major League player in history to have his uniform number retired by every team in Major League Baseball, how about the first African American to play Major League Baseball? He was the second. Nobody knows Moses Fleetwood Walker. This is my point. This is what we're doing. So, what does it also tell us about Major League Baseball? If we thought that Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball when technically he did not, it tells us that Major League Baseball then was integrated before Jackie Robinson, as indeed it was, which made baseball an outlier for America. There was no other American institution of the size of Major League Baseball in baseball's infancy in the 1870s, 1880s, when MLB is formed, that was integrated. How many black Supreme Court justices do you think there were in the 1870s? Right? Baseball alone was integrated, to its lasting credit. Then it will screw that up to its everlasting shame. But when it begins, when baseball begins, it actually is integrated. It's an exponential, it's an explosive growth right after the Civil War. First decade, 2 decades after the Civil War, 1870s, 1880s, where Major League Baseball takes off, it grows explosively, and it's growing fastest in the American South, where they're clearing lots and fields from debris from the Civil War to play baseball, and it looks, when it starts and grows, baseball looks a little bit more like America than any other major American institution of its size. Players like Bud Fowler, one of the most exciting, fascinating, extraordinary early black ball players. Fascinating story. I would say in the course of writing this book and researching, there are many stories you can imagine. Moving, poignant. There are 2 that I found heartbreaking. And Bud Fowler's was one of them. Now, you probably have never heard of Bud Fowler. If you have, you're either a member of SABR, the Society of American Baseball Research, or you're an incredible baseball fan, or you were paying attention last summer when Bud Fowler was inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame. Bud Fowler, Frank Reich, first black professional ball player from Massachusetts, the Berkshires, Cheshire, Pittsburgh, and most famous of all, the Walker Brothers. The Walker Brothers. Moses Fleetwood right here, his younger brother Weldy right there. They were teammates briefly on the 1881 Oberlin, Ohio College baseball team, and Moses Fleetwood Walker was a transformational figure. Not just a ball player, a transformational figure. First of all, he was transformational in terms of baseball. He transformed an entire position from something it wasn't to something it is today. Today, we would say the catcher, by and large, is the most skilled position in Major League Baseball. It was no such thing when baseball began. In fact, you've heard of the term backstop. You know, today, if you get a lazy sports writer trying to be cute, they may use the word backstop today to refer to the catcher. Today, we speak of the backstop generally as the physical structure, right? Behind home plate, cement, wood, whatever, right? Keep the ball from hitting people in the stands right during the game. That's not what it was. First of all, there weren't stands in most of these fields when they first started playing professional baseball, and the backstop was just what it sounded like. Backstop is where you would stick the single worst player of your team. They never do anything. They never do anything. You have one job. Keep the ball from rolling off the field and interrupting the flow of the game. That's all you got to do, Jude. I know you can't hit, you can't run, you can't throw. All you got to do is squat down and keep the ball from rolling off the field. Completely blew that out. He was an extraordinary athlete, first of all. Speedster. He was what we would call in baseball today, you've heard the term a 5-tool player. That was Walker. All 5 major facets of the game he played with extraordinary skill. He was fast, he could run, he could throw, he could field his position, he could hit, and he could hit with power. How good was he? Signed to a major league contract. As a young black man, signed to a major league contract. That's how good he was. Because they weren't dangling major league contracts in front of the lot of black ball players. That's how good he was. The Blue Stockings of Toledo were a major league team in the 1880s, and they signed Moses Fleetwood Walker to be the starting catcher for their 1884 season, but he was also transformational as a person. So look at the timing, 1884. It's almost exactly as the 1884 season begins. They're up by 1 year. It's almost exactly 20 years from the end of the Civil War, 20 years from emancipation, right, the freeing of the slaves, 20 years from Lincoln's assassination, 20 years later, as America, the new national pastime, begins its 1884 season. A young black man, a young black catcher, is about to become a young black catcher by the way, who was born when slavery still did exist, whose parents were born into slavery, is now about to become the first black ball player on a major league team. This was the feel-good story of 1884. Think about the timing again. This isn't just any time. This is they're about to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. A nation that is now through this national pastime. There was no national pastime before baseball. There was no sport that was played all over the country. Now these games are being played in the South, where you can have a player that actually fought for the Confederate Army and a player who fought for the Union Army, sliding into each other, getting up, dusting each other off, and going back to the game. This was inspiring to people, that this national pastime could help bind the country back together. And what better symbol than the first black ball player on a major league team? Alas, not everybody felt so good about it. And unfortunately, one of those who really, really didn't like it was someone who unfortunately had an oversized influence on Major League Baseball, Cap Anson. Cap Anson, well, first, to give the man history. Cap Anson was the first bona fide superstar of Major League Baseball. You may never have heard of him, but think of him in his day as all rolled into one. DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, you name it. That was Cap Anson. This is the dead ball era, right? The ball doesn't go as far, and he's hitting 16 to 20 home runs a season. That would be like hitting 50, 55 home runs every year today. Man still holds, to this day, several batting records of the Chicago Cubs. From the dead ball era, only one who still holds those kind of records from the dead ball era. He was the slugging captain of the marquee team of early baseball, the Chicago Cubs. Right, their days in the cellar and woebegone fans were later on. They started out as the New York Yankees of early Major League Baseball, and he was their captain. He was the face of the team. He was also an unrepentant racist. He was a vicious bully, and apparently he had an incredibly foul mouth. None of which is on his black computers. Cap Anson did not like the fact that his vaunted Chicago Cubs were opening up the 1884 season against a team that fielded a black ball player. I use air quotes because he never used the term black. He used a different term. So Cap Anson did not like it. Didn't like it enough that he played the game under protest, and when the game was over, he filed an official grievance with the owners of Major League Baseball, threatening that the Cubs would no longer take the field against any team that fielded a black ball player. But you can imagine that the owners of Major League Baseball have to take this threat pretty seriously. After all, the Cubs are the marquee team of the era, and Cap Anson is the marquee player of all time so far. Right? So they have to take that threat pretty seriously. First, they try to kick the can down the road a couple of years, and then Cap Anson says in 1886, that's it. That's it. Next season, we are not taking the field. And the owners had to finally deal with it, and they did. They did. In spectacularly cowardly fashion. In the summer of 1887, the owners of Major League Baseball met in Buffalo, New York at the Genesee House. There is no transcript of the meeting. There is no record of the vote. And not a single person who voted or was in that meeting ever answered a single question from a single member of the press. That's gutsy. Nonetheless, the deed was done. It was voted by a majority that going forward, Major League and minor league contracts would no longer be offered to black ball players. Those who were playing under existing contracts, like Walker, would be allowed to play them out, and there would be no more. The color barrier was now in place. So, I mentioned that Bud Fowler's story was something I found heartbreaking. And the reason is, Bud Fowler is a reminder of my own childhood in the sense that he seemed to live to play baseball. I mean, more than I ever did. And I don't mean figuratively. I mean literally. This man played baseball almost almost 365 days a year. How did he do that? Well, he would play baseball in North America during the summer. As it began to cool off and reach fall, he would be heading down toward Florida. By the time it was late fall up here, he would be playing in the Caribbean, and by the time it was full on winter in North America, he would be playing in Argentina and Chile. And then when it turned to spring up here, he would begin making his way. That is living to play baseball. The problem is that as of the color barrier, he was no longer able to do the single thing that seemed to give his life meaning and purpose. He died of a blood disorder in Frankfurt, New York in 1913. He was only 55. His unmarked grave told not a word of a truly extraordinary life. For years, as the color barrier began to spread, Bud Fowler, like other black ball players, had relentlessly fought for a place in organized baseball. Along with the other early black ball players, he had uncommon talent, there's no question. But as time went on, it seemed to those who observed him that Bud Fowler's singular talent seemed to be somehow outwitted. What everybody could see was the inescapable end. The end for Bud Fowler came in 1895 in Michigan. He was finally out of options. That all were. But Bud Fowler was literally the last black ball player standing. My skin is against me, Fowler wrote in 1895. If I hadn't been born quite so young, I might have caught on as a Spaniard or something like that. The race prejudice is so strong, my black skin just bothers me. Now, as the 20th century unfolded, it barred them all. The color barrier was complete. It would take another 50 years now of fierce Fowler-like will and determination to break through again. Now, we're about to cover over 50 years in less than 50 minutes. The upper challenge. Fortunately, we're not going to go by year. We're going to go by decade. It's going to make it a lot more manageable. So the color barrier, it becomes reality in 1887, right? Now we're into the 1890s. And this is the period when it isn't just baseball anymore that is giving itself up to segregation and racism. Now it's all over America, because this is the period when Jim Crow moves in. I would say moves in on steroids. How does Jim Crow move in on steroids? Thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is the period of Plessy versus Ferguson. This is a transportation issue that starts in Alabama, goes to Georgia. This is where Alabama tries to enact a law that would bar black passengers from trains unless there is a separate, dedicated, as the law put it, colored-only car. Goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court finds for Alabama. This is separate but equal. So now you have not only segregation, but state-sanctioned segregation. State-sanctioned segregation, and now it doesn't matter. Now it doesn't matter whether you're talking about playing baseball. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the workplace, schools, transportation, or just what side of the room you line up down to get a water, people water from a water fountain. Everything is now segregated. So there's another, I think, sometimes misunderstanding about the color barrier, which is that once the color barrier was in place, that somehow black baseball stopped or was in some sort of state of arrested development until Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier and the pipeline is opened up again. Could not be further from the truth. The only thing that great black ball players were barred from during this 50-plus year period was Major League Baseball. Not from playing baseball. This is the period. This period now from about 1900 to 1920 is in some ways a golden age. Hard to think of it that way because they were still barred from Major League Baseball, but it was the golden age of what is often called the Black Barnstorm era. I'm sure you've read about it, heard about it. Maybe there have been movies about it, Bingo Long's Traveling All-Stars, right? So this is the period where you have about a dozen, no more, but about a dozen really, really amazing Black Barnstorming teams. And these teams would sometimes drive hundreds of miles in a single weekend to play a few games. These rickety old buses, And there were some teams that they would play other Black Barnstable teams. They also played many professional white teams. And they would play often major league teams. Because this is the time when, well before baseball players are making, what was my favorite computation for Chris Sale at one point, making $18,000 a pitch. Right? So people aren't making $137 million a year now. Right? So first of all, every major league player during this period has a job during the winter. Right? Has a job during the winter. And if you had an open date on the schedule, you wouldn't want to fill it with an exhibition game, with another team that you could pass the hat, sell some tickets, and make some money. And Black Barnstorming teams frequently played major league teams and frequently beat them. My favorite example of that is in a weekend series, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, in 1903, when the Chicago Black Giants pitcher Rube Foster for the Black Giants played the Cincinnati Redlegs, as they were officially known then, today the Reds, in this weekend series, 3 games. The Black Giants beat them. The Chicago Black Giants beat the Cincinnati Reds all 3 games. And on Monday morning, the owner of the Cincinnati Redlegs put in place an order that the Reds were no longer to play any Black Barnstable teams. And by the way, Rube Foster, bigger than life, literally bigger than life, 6'3", 240 pounds, blazing fastball, first real standout star black pitcher, Texas kid. It was said to be terrifying to stand in against him. There were ball players, major league ball players too, worked on around this guy, would come up with phantom injuries. Ooh, my back, coach. And they didn't want to face him. They didn't want to face him. Now, part of that was because he very often had no idea where the ball was going. That doesn't help. But he understood something. Rube Foster is often called the father of black baseball. And not just because he was a great pitcher. He understood something about where baseball was at during this period. It's not that other people didn't. It's just that Rube Foster did something about it. He understood that he was never going to play in the major leagues. He could have played for any major league team he wanted. Not only played, he would have started as a star pitcher virtually any major league team. Couldn't. But he, selflessly, he understood. If black ball players are ever to get back to the major leagues, if the color barrier is ever going to be broken, it's whites. It's white America that has to be made aware of the level of talent that's there. Black America, black communities were following these teams. They had their favorite Barnstorming teams. They came out to watch them play. They knew who these players were. Whites did not. And Rube Foster understood Major League Baseball, right, is owned by whites. And if we are going to ever get back, it's whites who will need to see the level of play that we represent. There have been a couple of attempts at forming a league, an organized league of these Barnstorming teams, but both attempts failed. Rube Foster made it happen. Rube Foster is the father of black baseball because he created the single most vital unsung hero in the entire struggle to break the color barrier, the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues were born in 1920, February 13th, in Kansas City, Missouri. There is the proud papa, Rube Foster, having created his Negro Leagues. You are looking at the founding class of the Negro Leagues. You're looking at the founding class. I want to draw your attention to this gentleman right here. First thing to do is move that cursor so it's sooner or later it's going to be sticking up some of his nose. See that right there? It's sticking. So, I want to draw your attention right here. So, this is J.L. Wilkinson. J.L. Wilkinson was the owner of one of the 3 most iconic legendary Negro League teams, the Kansas City Monarchs. And J.L. Wilkinson would be the only white owner in the entire history of the Negro Leagues. Born in 1920, they begin to disappear in the early 1960s. By 1970, they're gone. Only white owner in the entire history. Now, I don't bring that up to point out some sort of racial peculiarity. I bring it up because, after all, we're talking about the color barrier. We're talking about Jackie Robinson, who, spoiler alert, is going to make an appearance here before we're done. there is a direct line from this day, founding of the Negro Leagues and Joe Wilkinson, 25 years out, straight shot to Jackie Robinson and breaking the color barrier, because Joe Wilkinson will be the Negro League owner that gives Jackie Robinson his first professional baseball contract. And after that point, it will only be 6 months until Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier. So the Negro Leagues are born, the Negro Leagues take off. Think of it like the barnstorming era, where there were just only about 12 really good barnstorming teams, and you've got all this baseball talent in Black America, and yet it's crimped, right? It's like a hose that's crimped, because there's only like a dozen or so teams. And now suddenly, it starts with 16 teams. The Negro Leagues, they're able to expand into 32 teams. They're able to break out into a Negro National League, a Negro American League, the first of 2 Negro League World Series, right? And so now all these players are able to find spots on teams, and people are being introduced to players that they didn't know existed. People like John Popsmore, the first real bona fide Negro League home run hitter, right? Judy Johnson, one of the most colorful players in baseball history. A decade or so later, Oscar Charleston, one of the greatest fielders in baseball history, and one of my all-time personal favorites, partly just because he has the best nickname that was ever created, James Cool Papa Bell. Arguably, actually I wouldn't say arguably, I think most baseball historians generally agree today that Cool Papa Bell was very likely the fastest human being to have ever played baseball. So the Negro Leagues take off. It looks like the sky will be the limit for the growth of the Negro Leagues. And it might have been if the first decade of the Negro Leagues didn't end with the roof falling instead. Because of course the 1920s ends with the Great Depression. And you know, I sometimes think, I'm sure some of you have relatives, parents, grandparents who grew up during the Great Depression. My late dad was, 10 years old in the worst years of the Great Depression, 30, 31, 32. I think we sometimes forget just how cataclysmic it was. You know, I mean, we've got problems today. But, you know, in terms of unemployment, for instance, we've had unemployment just in the last decade functionally under 1%. It's under 3% now. Now it's not good if you're in that 3% don't have a job, but the point is, 25% unemployment. 1933, a quarter of all Americans out of work. And you think that's bad. In minority communities, flip that. Flip that completely. In places like Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, only a quarter working. Only a quarter working, more than 30,000 businesses going up, belly under, during the worst years of the Great Depression, including the Negro Leagues. Gone. With one exception, as we'll see. Gone. Now, you might wonder, how many major leagues survived the Great Depression? I mean, after all, each one of the 16 major league teams is in on itself a thriving American business. 30,000 plus of which are going under, just like that. Subject to the same financial calamity that every other business is going under is subject to. So how many major league teams folded during the Great Depression? That's what I mean. The reason, though, I bring this up just to show the disparity that always existed, obviously, between the Negro Leagues and the American Leagues in a way that's hard to fully grasp, you know, now. All of the Negro Leagues, as I said, with one exception, that go under, it's all entirely about revenue. Listen, most of the early Negro League owners were wealthy men who had done well in business in the black community. Right? There's an important distinction. So their businesses survived on black support. They survived on slender lines of credit, sometimes from black-owned banks. Guess what happens to the black-owned banks in the Great Depression? Gone. The major league teams are insulated. Insulated in a way we can't fully comprehend it. Right? All of them. And I don't say this to knock them. All 16 then major league teams were owned by fabulously wealthy white men who had done well in business. So, you know, good for them. Good. Well, except for him. I'm not bashing on Tamayaki, other than to say, I'm going to tell you why I'm pointing this out here. He did not work as hard to create some of that wealth that his fellow owners did. He inherited it. I don't know if you remember what you got on your 16th birthday, but Tamayaki came to $16.34 million. Well, wait, hold on. 5 years later, he came into another $16.34 million, and he bought the Boston Red Sox. So that's good. But the reason I bring up Yawkey to tell you to what extent the major leagues were insulated during the Great Depression, meet the poorest of the then 16 major league owners. The poorest. I mentioned the Cubs. The Cubs were owned by a guy named Phil Wrigley. I guarantee everyone in this room, I don't know, I don't know the last name yet, uses Mr. Wrigley's product or has, right? Yeah, right. The Cardinals, even more money. Cardinals were owned by a guy named Augustus Busch. Mr. Busch was brewing a little beer outside those on the East Coast. Speaking of beer, Yankees, New York Yankees were owned by Colonel Jacob Rupert. Jacob Rupert was brewing Knickerbocker beer. They were fabulously more wealthy than Pauper Tom Yawkey. Right? So I point that out to show you how they survived, and the Negro Leagues didn't. I said there was one exception, and there was, and we are back to our friend J.L. Wilkinson of the Monarchs. Because J.L. Wilkinson was really a fascinating guy, and he was way ahead of his time. Even for today, he was an incredibly progressive person. He really was. And when the Depression hit, this team, during the early years of the Depression, is integrated. And when the Depression hit, he told his team that I will try to keep everybody on the payroll, but we're going to have to play baseball almost every day. I will buy a bus and travel around, and we can try to pick up games. And they did. And they did. They couldn't have kept doing this forever. And fortunately for our story and for history, they didn't have to. Because in the worst years of the Great Depression, the single most improbable event in the entire story takes place. The Negro Leagues are reborn. And look where they're reborn, which makes it doubly improbable. They're reborn in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, ground zero for American unemployment. And they are brought back to life by two guys who, improbably enough, were lifelong arch enemies. Hated each other's guts. And apparently the only time they ever cooperated on anything, and the only time they ever met face to face in the same room and talked to each other, was a meeting to bring the Negro Leagues back to life. Cumberland Posey Jr., fascinating figure in his own right. His dad, Cumberland Posey Sr., was a pioneering black figure in Pittsburgh. One of the very first licensed certified civil engineers, started a couple of his own thriving American businesses. I'm sure he hoped that his young son would follow him into the business, but Cumberland Posey Jr. was a sports fanatic. Basketball, which is a relatively new sport, and baseball. Baseball thankfully won out. He was approached in the late 1920s about trying to save a legendary black ball team, the Homestead Grays, the second of the most iconic Negro League teams. Homestead's a section of Pittsburgh. They were up for sale. If nobody bought them, they were going to fold. Right? So he cobbles some money together, takes out a few loans. His dad lends him some money, and he's able to buy the Homestead Grays. Good. Now, he had played baseball. He had coached baseball. He had a skill, though, that had never come out before. And now it did. Now, in his first year of owning the Homestead Grays, he was doing it all. He was the owner. He was the general manager. He was the on-field manager. He was the coach. He was the trainer. He sold tickets and running out of fingers. You get the idea. But his greatest talent, it seemed, was about to come to the fore. And no one could have expected it because no one had ever seen it before. He was one of those coaches. And maybe if you've ever played sports in your life, maybe there's been a man or a woman who was a coach that was just, you know those coaches that, yeah, you know they want to win. And you know they're disappointed when you don't. But you don't know. And you always have the feeling, I think they're trying to teach us. Right? Like, that was Composer Jr. So instead of talking about the quality he had, why don't I just show you the results? So in 1931, his first year, owner, manager of the Homestead Grays, all they did was they had the greatest single season before or since of any baseball team in the history of baseball. Let me put 146 wins in context, okay? So first of all, today baseball plays 162 games. Then they only played 162 in terms of the number. Again, baseball teams do not do that. It's never happened. It almost happened in terms of winning 154 games. But let me put it in context for today. Today, in 2023, as we approach the start of the season, baseball season, there are 3 major league teams today that cumulatively, in the last 2 seasons, have not won 146 games. Cumulatively, they won 146 games. Now, his arch nemesis, Gus Greenlee, wanted to outdo that, and he almost did. Now, completely different story. Gus Greenlee, hard-scrabble youth, one of 6 brothers, goes off to fight in World War I. He's wounded at the Battle of Verdun. He's decorated. He comes back to Pittsburgh. Now he needs a job. It's both Prohibition and the Great Depression. You can't even get a drink to drown your sorrows. He cobbles some money together. He buys a rickety old car. He's going to drive a cab. Great. Guy comes up to him and says, Doc, how'd you like to make a little extra money? I represent the Latrobe Brewing Company. Anybody ever have a roller rock?
Yeah.
That was the Latrobe Brewing Company, even then. Of course, they weren't brewing it legally then, but they were still brewing. So he says, listen, you want to make a little extra money? We need somebody to ferry our bootleg hooch around to a couple of speakeasies. He was like, sure, I'll do it. So he's doing that. Guy comes up to him a little while later. He says, you want to make a little extra money? He said, what do you got? He said, I represent several bookies in Pittsburgh, and we need somebody to run the slips, the paper, booking bets, the numbers, on the fights, on the football games, the boxing, whatever. He said, yeah, I'll do it. Now, he was a smart cookie, so he realized after he was doing this for a few months that if he could just get rid of the middleman, he could make a lot more money. So he did. I don't think he got rid of them, but he went into business by himself. He went into business by himself. And now he was making a lot of money. How much money? You're supposed to say, how much? How much money was he making? I'll tell you. During the Depression, Gus Greenlee was making $12,500, wait for it, a week. Do you have any idea? I do, because I consulted with an economist at MIT, who I know for a fact regretted ever taking my phone call. But nonetheless, he did crunch the numbers. If you were making $12,500 a week in 1932, that would be like having been making $11.9 million. That's what he was making. So he's making more money than he literally knows what to do with. So he's trying to figure out what to do with it. He decides, I'm going to open up a jazz club, right? So he opens up a jazz club, the Crawford Grill. Legendary spot, Crawford Avenue in the Hill District of Lexington, Pittsburgh. And now he's running a jazz club. Everybody played there. It's a great story. Google it sometime. Every jazz great you can think of that era. Gillespie, Dizzy, Louis Armstrong, Ella, Billie Holiday. They all played the Crawford Grill. I don't know how much Gus Greenlee liked jazz. What he did like was this was a great way to launder all this dirty money. So he's doing this, and then somebody approaches him about saving another Pittsburgh baseball team. And he does. I don't know how much he loved baseball, but he said, oh, this is another great way. So he does, and he takes on and he renames the team to promote his jazz club, and the Pittsburgh Crawfords are reborn. The third most legendary Negro League team, and now he's the owner of the Crawfords, and in his first year of owning the Pittsburgh Crawfords in 1932, he almost outdoes his arch nemesis' record, and he wins almost 100 games. And he did it by, pretty much the same way he achieved a lot of else. He kind of stole it. No, he poached, he poached the 2 best players of his team, the Homestead Rays. Now, listen, in fairness, they each made an art form out of this. They both poached each other's best players all the time. They poached each other's best players at the start of the season, the end of the season, the middle of the season, and in one celebrated instance, which I still don't fully understand, in the middle of the inning. So that must have been confusing. But when I say he poached the 2 best players of the Homestead Rays, that's true. Beyond question. They also happen to be 2 of the best players who ever played baseball. One of them was a promising young pitcher. I give you Satchel Paige. The other was a promising young catcher. I give you Josh Gibson. It is impossible to overstate the importance, the significance, the sheer magnitude of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. In other words, there were great Negro League players. And there are great Negro League players who are as good as any of the great Major League players, white Major League players. The difference is that Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson were two of the greatest people who ever played the sport. Ever played. They are both in the Hall of Fame. Satchel Paige would be on my list of the 5 greatest pitchers who've ever played baseball. He was an immensely colorful figure. Quotes that still go on to this day. People quote Satchel Paige. Josh Gibson was different. Josh Gibson was very shy, very tiring, very tragic life, and he was perfectly happy. Whether it was a game, whether it was out, whatever, he was always happy to let his friend, sometimes teammate, sometimes roommate, Satchel Paige, talk for him. Because he always said, I let the bat do the talking. But, make no mistake, incredible slugger. May have hit the longest home run ever hit in Yankee Stadium. Known universally, even in his own playing days, known universally as the Black Babe Ruth. Funny story. Late in his career, he met the real life Babe Ruth. I love the story. He threw his arm, Babe Ruth threw his arm around Josh Gibson. And I guess Ruth liked to shake people a little bit. Get away with that today. But he liked to shake him a little bit. So he shaked, he said, Mr. Gibson, what an honor. And he said, hey, I hear they call you the Black Babe Ruth. How does that feel? Josh Gibson is supposed to look at Babe Ruth and say, well, Mr. Ruth, my people call you the White Josh Gibson. So, how do we know so much about the Negro Leagues? I just been going on, as we should, because it's the most important part of the story for the first 15, almost 20 minutes we talk about the Negro Leagues. There are whole libraries, including, I'm sure, this one, that have shelffuls of books about early black baseball, the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues did not keep things. The Negro Leagues were hand-to-mouth operations. The Negro Leagues were concerned with whether or not for every game they had cleats, gloves, bats, balls, uniforms for all the players, a bus, gas for the bus to get us to the game. They weren't hiring statisticians. So the Negro Leagues did not keep track of their own records. So what about the white mainstream press, right? Big newspapers, Post, Globe, New York Times, the Tribune. Were they keeping go? They were not. There was never in the entire history of the Negro Leagues a single mainstream beat reporter dedicated to the Negro Leagues, not one team, not all the Negro Leagues as a whole, in the entire history of the Negro Leagues. So if the Negro Leagues weren't keeping track of their own records, what was going on, and the white mainstream press wasn't keeping track, then how do we know so much about the Negro Leagues? The black press. The black press. The black press was the single, second to the Negro Leagues, the single most significant, vital, unsung hero in breaking color barrier because it was the black press that introduced players like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson to white America. We did not know about them before. In 1939, Satchel Paige pitching for the Black Yankees, exhibition game against the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium, struck out Joe DiMaggio 3 times. Only time in DiMaggio's entire career he struck out 3 times. That game was famously written up by a great sports writer named Wendell Smith. And people were introduced to that story all over America, white America. And they were saying, oh my God, who is this guy? Struck out DiMaggio 3 times. Why can't we get him in San Francisco? Why can't we get him in Chicago? Ah, you can. Wendell Smith would write. It's a little thing called the color barrier. People were like, oh, is that still around? Oh. That was what was crucial about the black press and publishers like Robert Lee Vann, Pittsburgh Courier, greatest distribution of any black newspaper in American history, just slightly more so than Robert Sengstack Abbott's equally legendary Chicago Defender. They had a charge. First of all, they were reporting for the black community and not just about baseball. Not just about baseball, but when it came to baseball, and it came to the writers that they hired, like Wendell Smith and Sam Lacey, these writers had a charge directly from the publisher, and that was, you have a double job to do, gentlemen. What do we say? Yes, you keep track of the box score, and you report the game, and you remind people when they want to know why they can't get Satchel Paige, why they can't. And by the way, Mr. Lacey, he would often say, you remind yourself why you can't write for the New York Times. And they did. And they did. So I mentioned that people were reading about Satchel Paige all over America. How? Because just like the Negro Leagues were hand-to-mouth operations, black newspapers were hand-to-mouth operations. It was all they could do to make deadline 5 nights a week and get their newspapers out to the half dozen or so little newsstands in just the black community. They weren't selling papers in the white community. And it was still a hand-to-mouth operation. So how could they possibly get their newspapers distributed all over America? The single most unlikely, fascinating, extraordinary unsung hero in the whole world. The Pullman. What, you may understandably be wondering, did the Pullman Porters have to do with baseball? Nothing. But everything. The Pullman Porters, as you may remember, you may know, they were the face of overnight train travel during the golden age of rail, 20s, 30s, 40s. They were the face, they were servants on wheels. That's not my description. That's the mission statement of George Mortimer Pullman, who created the Pullman Porters. They were to be servants on wheels. They would meet you at the platform, and they would take your luggage, they would take you on. They would show you to your seats. Later, they would show you to the dining room. Later, after that, they would show you to your berth and take down the covers. This gentleman is keeping track of who needs a wake-up call. Well, that's not. But nonetheless, so what does it do with baseball? Glad you asked. Remember these pioneering publishers? They were very, very creative, ingenious newspaper publishers. They understood, like all newspaper publishers. Listen, the New York Times at that time, anytime. Any newspaper has to be concerned with constantly growing their distribution. Right? So were they. Only they had a much harder time doing that than the New York Times. They looked at the Pullman Porters and they saw something that the Times didn't have. They saw in the Pullman Porters, if they could be recruited, this incredible talent. Because the Pullman Porters, unlike other black Americans in the 1930s, or whites, nobody's traveling all around the country in the 1930s. They were. And these publishers realized if we could somehow recruit them to a cause of distributing our newspapers and getting stories like Wendell Smith's out to people all over America, we would be able to raise the consciousness of people, especially in white America, that yes, the color barrier still exists and it's preventing people like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige from playing in the major leagues. And they did. They didn't need every single Pullman Porter. They only needed one or two, once or twice a week, on runs all around the country, and they got that. They got that. So you're wondering, how did it work? Well, the Pullman Porters were also responsible for provisioning the train, food, right? They were in the kitchen. So let's say a train is making a run down the whole eastern seaboard from Boston to Miami, right? So the Pullman Porters have to take on, let's say, the route. So let's say the Pullman Porters from Boston, the train's going to leave South Station, make a run down to Miami. Let's say they have a deal with a black bakery in Forest Hills, Mattapan, Roxbury, what have you. Little bakery truck, at that time you could roll right out onto the platform, little platform in the back of the truck, 4 or 5 5-foot-tall wicker baskets full of bread. What do you think is in here? Black newspapers from Boston. Boston Guardian, Boston Reporter, the Boston Chronicle. No relation. I like it nonetheless. Train takes off, first stop Penn Station, New York. They offload Boston's black newspapers. They unload the Amsterdam News from New York, right? They go on down to Baltimore. They offload the Amsterdam News. They unload the Afro-American from Baltimore. They're doing this all the way down through Chattanooga, all the way to Miami. And in this way, by 1939, I love this story, you have the following take place. New York Times executive on vacation in San Francisco gets up one morning, decides, I'm going to get up early, I'm going to walk down the street, I'm going to buy the New York Times. Came in overnight, puts on, I'm sure, his little junky fedora, lights up an unfiltered Lucky, he's walking down the street, stops at a newsstand, no New York Times. Well, what's this? The Pittsburgh Courier. happens at the next newsstand. Calls New York. What the hell's going on? I can't find today's paper, but I'm finding the Pittsburgh Courier all over the damn place. That's what's going on. The Pullman Ports. So now we are up to 1940. Now we are up to 1940. And spoiler alert, we have about less than 10 minutes left. Only 5 years in our story left. Spoiler alert, the color barrier is going to fall. Jackie Robinson is going to appear. Baseball was no closer to dropping a color barrier in 1940 than it was in 1930, 1920, 1910. You get the idea. This guy, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, was the first commissioner of Major League Baseball appointed in 1920. He's still a commissioner. Still not going to talk about the color barrier. Order. That's the word that everybody seems to use if you research Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Yeah, he was an ornery. Sometimes there's 3 words after that too. But he was ornery. I'm pretty sure he's smoking in the no smoking section too. So what happens? Well, the decade of the 1930s, just like the decade of the 1920s, ends in another worldwide cataclysm. World War II. And in New York, Lester Rodney is about to become the person who frames the argument that will bring the color barrier down. Lester Rodney was nobody's profile, image, picture of an ally in the struggle to break the color barrier. Not that he liked the color barrier, he did not. He hated the color barrier, but he just didn't look the part. First of all, he's in New York, which to this point was not the focus of the struggle to break the color barrier. So he's in New York. He's white. He's Jewish. He's a communist. And nobody's perfect. But he saw something. He wanted to write for anybody as a young sports writer. And he got hired by the American Communist Party's daily newspaper, the Daily Worker, who started a sports section in the late 1930s. He got the job. But he saw something and he started writing it in every single, so even it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he wrote about a tennis match in Flushing or he wrote about the Yankees playing the Indians at the stadium. As part of his covering the game, he started to point out to people something. America, dear reader, he would say, is going to war. By the way, this is the late 1930s, so there's plenty of people in America who do not want to go to war in the 1930s, even while Europe is already in the war. Not until 1941, don't forget. He would say, you mark my words, America is going to war. Blacks as well as whites will enlist and be drafted to fight. And blacks as well as whites will be asked to die if necessary to defend democracy. The difference, he wrote, is those who are black, having just been asked to die for their country, will return to a country where they're still second-class citizens, can't sit where they want on a bus, and can't play Major League Baseball. This is the argument that will bring the color barrier down within the next 5 years. It's picked up on by all kinds of people. The Pittsburgh Courier. Pittsburgh Courier picks up this argument, Lester Rodney's argument, and they used it in a way to help young black men and women who were going off to fight. This was an agonizing choice. Do you want to die for a country that values you less than the person who's next to you in a foxhole? This was meant, the double victory campaign that was based on Lester Rodney's argument was meant to help rationalize that choice. Yes, fight. Defeat Adolf Hitler, first victory. Come home, defeat Jim Crow, double victory. That handkerchief, which the Pittsburgh Courier gave out to his readers, was worn in the bomber jacket sleeve of all members of the Tuskegee Airmen, the most celebrated all-black unit in World War II. But it is another all-black unit that I bet you've never heard of that is going to take us to the end of our story from the turn of the tank. The 761st Tank Battalion. The 761st Armored was the very first all-black army unit. They fought the Patton's Third Army. They set records for consecutive days at the front. One of the first units to cross over into Germany, one of the first units to liberate a death camp. But for this story, what makes the 761st so significant is that they were led by a young lieutenant named Jack Roosevelt Dawkins. Jackie Robinson received his lieutenant's reps at Fort Kearny in Kansas in 1940. By 1941, he'd been transferred to Fort Hood in Texas to help take control of the 761st. And he could not wait to lead the 761st into combat from the turret of the Sherman tank. Didn't get it. Didn't get it. 761st did. Without a young lieutenant. Just before the 761st shipped out, Jackie Robinson flunked his final visit. Old football injury reared its head. He'd been an All-American halfback at UCLA. Knee injury reared up, not cleared for combat. Desperately sought for permission to accompany the unit as a special morale officer. Reached out to the White House, requested out. Jackie Robinson was crushed. Said it was the biggest disappointment of his life. 761st ships out. Robinson decides he's going to go back to the base, have a drink at the Black Officers Club, drown his sorrows, jumps on a bus. Fort Hood is still one of the biggest military bases in the world. Buses constantly circling the bases. Jumps on a bus, takes a seat, front row, right behind the driver. You've probably seen this as well. So, in 1944, it didn't matter whether you were getting on a bus in a military uniform on a military base or whether you were getting on a bus in Chattanooga. You were still expected, if you were black, to move to the back of the bus when it filled up with whites. And it does fill up. Bus driver asks Jackie Robinson to move to the bus. Jackie Robinson refuses. Jackie Robinson knew something that night that the bus driver may not have known, probably didn't know, testified later he didn't know. But Jackie Robinson knew that 48 hours earlier, President Roosevelt had signed an executive order forbidding discrimination within domestic American military bases. So Robinson knew he could sit where he wanted. Bus driver didn't know, didn't care. Pulls over at a sentry post. 2 MPs get on the bus. They handcuff Jackie Robinson, take him off the bus. He's arrested, court-martialed, insubordination. How many of you know that Jackie Robinson was no one knew. There's a good reason for that. And I would say it sounds like twisted logic, but I think you get my point. If you knew that Jackie Robinson would be court-martialed, you'd be like one of the only people you've ever met who knew who Jackie Robinson was. Because Jackie Robinson would be a footnote in history. If he had actually been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army, British Ricky would never have been able to sign it. But he beat the court-martial. So now, in 1944, he's about to trade his Army uniform for a baseball uniform because he needs a job. He's honorably discharged, needs a job, and somebody tells him about the owner of the Kansas City Monarchs in Kansas City, who apparently is desperate for some players because some of his best players are not yet back from the war. So Robinson writes the owner, Gerald Wilkinson, a letter. And he says, Mr. Wilkinson, my name's Jackie Robinson. I played baseball before, never professionally, but I played, I think I'm pretty good. I need a job. I understand you're looking for some players, and I'm wondering if I could get a tryout. I know you're in Houston for spring training, and I'm wondering if I can get a tryout. Yours truly, Jackie Robinson. I would have loved, if there's one phone conversation I would love to have heard, it's this one. So Gerald Wilkinson didn't write back. He called him back. Jackie Robinson picks up the phone. He says, hello? He says, this is Gerald Wilkinson, owner of the Kansas City Monarchs. Jackie Robinson, well, this is Jackie Robinson. He says, I know who you are. So, you want to try it? He said, I'd love to try it. The answer is no. Now, apparently there was like 5 minutes where neither one said anything. Finally, Wilkinson said, would you like to know why? He said, I would. You can't try it, but you got a job. Now get yourself to Houston in spring training, you're going to start the season with me at second base, and he hung up the phone. So, Jackie Robinson made for Houston, where he was about to start spring training. We're about to start the season with the Kansas City Monarchs. How many of you know that less than 3 weeks from the time this picture is taken of Jackie Robinson taking the field in 1945 in Kansas City, that in Boston, 3 weeks later, he will be. And he will be taking the field in Fenway Park to try out for the Boston Red Sox. Because in Boston, at the same time, this man is desperately trying to find a way to give tryouts to returning Negro League players. Is he much? He's a fascinating figure. only the second Jewish Boston City Councilor. He would become the first Jewish chairman of the Boston School Committee. He lived by something that in Hebrew is called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam translates literally from the Hebrew as repair the world. It is something that Jews are commanded to do their entire lives, whether it's in social justice, whether it is to help the hungry, but you are expected to try to repair the world whenever you can. It doesn't have to be something huge, by the way. Any rabbi will tell you that if you offer someone a kind word or a pat on the back at the time they need it, you are repairing their world at that moment. He did have his eye on something much bigger, integrating baseball. So he was also picking up on Lester Roddy's argument, and he was trying to find a way to pressure major league teams to give some tryouts to some of these players that are coming back. But how? He's trying to figure out how to have some leverage with the Boston Red Sox. He's a brilliant young lawyer, Harvard Law School, could have worked for any firm in Boston he wanted to, but he refused to change his name. So he has a law practice, and he's trying to find some leverage, and then he finds it. And remember the old blue laws? Not many left, but there was a blue law that was still in the books in Boston in 1945, which prohibited Major League Baseball from being played on Sunday without the unanimous vote of the Boston City Council. Izzy Muchnick sits back in his chair and realizes, I sit on the Boston City Council. Leverage! So he writes a letter to the brain trust of the Boston Red Sox. There they are. There's owner Tom Yawkey, there's player manager Joe Cronin, and there is Eddie Collins, general manager of the Boston Red Sox. Himself, a Hall of Famer, very loquacious, very charming Southern guy. And he gets this letter in which Muchnick asks him to, if he would respectfully consider giving a tryout, not a job, a tryout, to some qualified returning black baseball players. And Eddie Collins writes back and he says, my esteemed counselor, you can see this is. He says, I certainly sympathize with you. Yes. But he said, I must tell you that in my entire tenure with the Boston Red Sox, not a single Negro as hero baseball player has ever sought employment with us. I can only deduce that there is no interest. Well, Izzy Muchnick was a bulldog. Played golf at Harvard, no mask. He understood. The load of incoming you know what. So he waited a little bit. Then he waited a little more. Then he waited until it was 1 week to the day before the vote was to be held in Boston City Council, and he sent a cablegram, quicker. He sent a cable to Eddie Collins. And he said, Mr. Collins, it appears you have no interest in entertaining my sincere request. And therefore, this cable should serve to inform you that when the vote for Sunday baseball is held in the City Council chamber Wednesday next, I will be withholding my vote. I don't know what the exact duration of time was between the time Eddie Collins opened up that cable and appeared in his boss's office. I have a very strong sense it was well under 5 minutes, and he was running when he got there. This would have been an economic calamity. 1945, pre-TV, baseball makes all its money from ticket sales, and on Sunday, in 1945, every single major league team plays 2 games. The Red Sox would have been denied 50% of their Sunday revenue. Unthinkable, have to have this tryout. So they send a cable back to Izzy Muchnick. They say, fine, pretty much. You can have your tryout. Three players. That's it. No press. Any press, the deal's off. Have these guys at Gate D, Monday morning, 11 a.m., April 12th, 1945. Eddie Collins. Now, Izzy Muchnick knew a lot about Boston bylaws. He didn't know a lot about black baseball, so he consulted with Wendell Smith, and he asked him, would you come up and hand select, would you come up with 3 qualified black players for a tryout with the Boston Red Sox? So Wendell Smith did. Sammy Jethro, Marvin Williams, and a talented infielder out of Kansas City named Jackie Robinson. And they trooped to Boston, all ready to have their tryout on April 12th. Didn't happen. On April 12th, 1945, history intervened. On April 12th, 1945, Franklin Roosevelt died. And America shut down. 24 hours later, America began to open up. 48 hours later, America is basically back to normal, except at the offices of the Boston Red Sox, where they appear to be in the throes of inconsolable grief over Roosevelt's death. What they were really trying to do was run out of clock. And they almost made it. They almost made it. One more day. All they had to do was get to April 16th. Because on the afternoon of April 16th, the Red Sox are going to catch a train to New York City where they're going to open up the 45 season against the Yankees the next day. The morning of April 16th, the story breaks. White sports writer Dave Egan, the old Boston Record American, breaks the story. Front page, letter to Boston. You're not aware of it, he wrote. At this hour, there are 3 qualified Negro, as he wrote, ball players who have been marooned in a hotel room for the last week and a half, having been promised a tryout by your Boston Red Sox, who are now trying to renege on the deal and skip town. The Red Sox knew that at that time. They called up Muchnick, they said, get him over here. And they did. They trooped over to Fenway Park, they suited up, they ran the bases, they took some infield, they took some batting practice. They were called back off the field about 45 minutes later. They were thanked very much. They were all told that the Red Sox would be in touch. None of them ever heard from the Red Sox the rest of their natural lives. But you know who was paying rapt attention? Actually having a total freak out in Brooklyn, New York, was Branch Rickey. Because Branch Rickey was getting reports out of Boston who Sox owner Tom Yawkey, who he loathed, by the way, was about to give a tryout and maybe sign Jackie Robinson, with whom he already had a plan in place to break the color barrier. Okay. So he realized he had to spring his wax shoe, and he did. And he did. Now look, we know now, hindsight is 2020, right? We know now, if we could have gone back as a time traveler, we could have told Branch, take it easy, take it easy. Take a trip around the world, twice. It's going to take Yawkey another 14 years to sign a black ball player. But he didn't know that. So as soon as the Negro League season ended in September 1945, Jackie Robinson was whisked to the offices of the Brooklyn Dodgers in Brooklyn Heights to sign a contract with their top minor league team. And then, just 2 years later, almost to the day of the sham tryout, wearing number 42, as he strode out to his position at first base amid the din of cheering fans, of broadcasters announcing history, and of exploding flashbulbs capturing it, there were also 2 inaudible sounds at Evans Field that day. Of a wall falling, and of a cheering that couldn't be heard with the ear, only with the heart. It rose from those not present physically, but spiritually. Those who could not be seen, but within just the same. Moses Fleetwood Walker didn't live to see it. And by the time he died, broken, bitter, alcoholic, he couldn't even imagine it. He was there. Bud Fowler, a man who seemed to travel the world just to live his life, anywhere he could. Today, he was in Brooklyn. The Pullman Porters, some of them that very morning rolling along the rails less than a mile from Ebbets Field, who had gotten the stories of these Negro League players out to readers all around America. Now, they were in Brooklyn. The Negro Leaguers past and present, those who had come too early and those who were young enough to imagine that they too might now walk through the wall, they were there. And the African American veterans of the war just ended, and those who were deep in the lives, they were there. On this momentous day, a ball game was played before a crowd both present and cheering, and another crowd silent and unseen. They watched the game, and they watched the terrible wrong being finally right. To be sure, even as a black ball player bounded onto an otherwise all-white field, racism was still alive and well in Brooklyn and clear on across America. So many other barriers remained in place. Sadly, they still are. But on this day, some of the hurt and the humiliation was salved. On this day, hope and faith that had long seemed to have run out seemed to be magically redeemed. On this day, the long arc of the moral universe seemed to bend improbably toward Brooklyn, touching down on the dirt and the grass of a creaky old ballpark where the familiar white lines would no longer bar a black ball player. And in the bottom of the 7th inning, right there, when Jackie Robinson laid down a perfect bunt and raced toward first base, he was not alone. That invisible crowd was certainly right there, right alongside, willing safely on to second grade. He jumped up and caught his breath. They exhaled. After all, it had been a long, 60-year, uncertain journey, and they helped him get through. The next Dodger batter, Doug. Jackie Robinson, round the third. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. If anybody has a question or two, I'm happy to take a question or two. Yes?
I remember hearing the Willie Mays dad cry out too.
Aha, you are right. Oh my goodness, I don't know which is worse. You know, so, Greg, I'm so glad you brought that up. So the Red Sox not only could have signed Jackie Robinson, the Red Sox could have signed Willie Mays. Now, the Red Sox always have a way, like zealot, of popping up in history, right? Do you know what team Willie Mays played for?
Was that Alabama team? Birmingham.
He later played for him. When the scouts saw him play, he was playing for the Memphis Red Sox. You can't make it up. And they put it at a drive. This scout, in fact, I'm pretty sure if you go online, I think you can still read the text of this scout's report on Willie Mays. This scout sounds like he has just seen the second coming of Hank Aaron, Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. It is like so over the top, you know? And yet, they were like, okay, yeah, they'll keep those reports coming, you know? And that was it. So yes. So, you know what I always say, you know, you could have got, so in 1948, the Red Sox lost the one-game playoff to the Cleveland Indians, right? They lost from the American League tournament. And what's doubly disappointing about that is that they would have been in the World Series, Subway Series with the Boston Braves, which were an amazing series. You could have walked between the two parts because the Braves were the National League pennant winners. And the Red Sox lost a one-game playoff to the Cleveland Indians. Now, that team in 1948 could have had Ted Williams, Jackie Robinson, and Willie Mays. Who do you think would have won that game?
Larry Doby.
Anyway, great legend. Anyone else?
I was jumping up and down on a hill at my college in Durham, North Carolina, when the World Series was coming up with Jackie Robinson. Yeah, he was
in 55, in 1955.
47.
Well, 55, they won the World Series. Right?
Yeah.
It was the only time they won. Oh, I bet. Oh, I bet.
And the bus driver when the Interstate Commerce Commission laws were passed that you could sit anywhere on the bus. Me with my smart self, I'm going to sit up near the front. And this big burly bus driver got on, I'm in North Carolina.
Yeah, right.
He got on, came and told me to move. And I said, well, the law said so and so and so.
How old were you?
He said, well, you are not. I was 17. Yeah. And he said, well, this is my bus, and you're going to move back there. And I did. Because I was afraid I'd get hurt.
Yeah, but you know what? You still made some good trouble.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. It took a while, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It took a while. Any other questions? Any other questions? Yes.
Are you going to be signing the books?
Yes. Thank you. This is why I bring my agent. That's all. Thank you for bringing that. That's the best question of all. Yes, I do have books. If there are no other questions, okay. If there are no other questions, I do have books with me tonight. I would be delighted to sign a book for anyone who would like one. Go ahead, buy it. But I would be delighted to do that. So I will do that. I will take a seat over here while people are taking off. But I do want to say thank you. Thank you all for coming to join me tonight.